Joseph Stalin. In the last years of his life, Stalin's health deteriorated. By 1950 to 1951, he was so ill that he spent nearly 5 months resting at his dacha in Abkhazia, deeply distrustful of those around him, including his own doctors. In January 1952, Stalin imprisoned one physician who had advised him to retire for the sake of his health. His suspicions culminated in the infamous doctor's plot, a fabricated case accusing prominent physicians of planning to assassinate high-ranking Soviet officials. On March 1, 1953, Stalin was found unconscious on the floor of his bedroom. He was laid on a bed and kept alive for 3 days, fed with a spoon, given medicines, and administered injections. However, his condition steadily worsened until his death on March 5. The autopsy confirmed that he had died from a cerebral hemorrhage, aggravated by severe atherosclerosis that had damaged his arteries. When his body was put on public display, the massive crowds eager to pay their respects caused chaos, leading to numerous deaths from trampling and suffocation. Despite official reports, rumors and theories quickly spread. Many suspected that Stalin's death was not natural. Some claimed that he was deliberately poisoned or simply left to die by those close to him, especially Lavrenti Beria, the head of the secret police. Others argue that his isolation and mistrust prevented timely medical assistance. Hideki Tojo, a general, a militarist ideologue, and Japan's prime minister during World War II, he was the one who authorized the attack on Pearl Harbor, bringing the country into the global war. Under his leadership, conflicts spread across China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. Executions, human experiments, famine, and devastation became inseparable from the Imperial Army. For the Allies, Tojo personified Japanese aggression. After Japan's surrender in August 1945, following the 2 atomic bombings, General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the occupation forces, ordered the arrest of 40 top leaders of the Japanese regime, Tojo among them. On September 11 of that year, 5 American soldiers came to his residence in Tokyo's Setagaya district. Tojo knew what awaited him. He had made preparations, dressed in his military uniform, wrote a farewell note, and once he realized capture was unavoidable, shot himself in the chest with a pistol. Aiming for his heart, he missed. Bleeding heavily, he collapsed on the floor but remained alive. At that point, the Americans entered the room. Japanese reporters were present, and Tojo managed to tell them, "I am sorry it takes me so long to die. The Greater East Asia War was just and righteous. I grieve for the nation, and for all Asiatic peoples. I await the fair judgment of history." The soldiers quickly summoned doctors. His life was saved through a blood transfusion and emergency care. Soon after, Tojo was placed in Sugamo prison. There he awaited trial before the Tokyo Tribunal, the eastern counterpart of Nuremberg. The proceedings lasted 2 years. Tojo did not deny responsibility. He admitted his guilt, but maintained the war had been justified. He was convicted on most charges: initiating aggressive war, breaching the laws of war, and committing mass crimes against humanity. The punishment was death by hanging. On December 23, 1948, just a few days before his 64th birthday, before his execution, he expressed remorse for the Japanese army's actions and urged the Americans to show mercy to the Japanese people. Pol Pot. Pol Pot is the nickname by which Saloth Sar, the leader of the Khmer Rouge and the architect of one of the most monstrous regimes of the 20th century, went down in history. Inspired by the ideas of Maoism, he dreamed of transforming Cambodia into a utopian agrarian state, completely cleansed of cities, intellectuals, money, religion, and even personal attachments. In 1975, his movement captured the capital, Phnom Penh. Millions of people were forcibly relocated to the countryside. City dwellers were enemies of the revolution. The educated were suspects. Even those who wore glasses could be executed as bourgeois intellectuals. People were killed for the slightest insubordination, for a broken hoe, for a complaint, and even for tears. Pol Pot dreamed of erasing the past, starting the count of history from year 0. During his 4 years in power, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million people, almost a quarter of the country's population, died from starvation, torture, executions, and forced labor. By 1979, neighboring Vietnam invaded Cambodia, putting an end to the Khmer Rouge regime. Pol Pot fled into the jungle, from where he continued to fight for many years, now as a guerrilla, with the support of China and Thai intelligence. His name became synonymous with genocide, yet he remained free. His movement was formally responsible for the mass killings, but Pol Pot himself was never touched. Moreover, he represented Cambodia at the United Nations for nearly a decade, thanks to the Cold War, when the West supported any anti-Vietnamese movement, even if it consisted of executioners. By the mid-90s, the Khmer Rouge began to disintegrate. Old comrades lost faith in Pol Pot. In 97, he ordered the killing of his closest ally Son Sen and his family, 13 people, including children. This was the last straw. General Ta-mok, one of the commanders, staged a mutiny, arrested Pol Pot, and placed him under house arrest. In April of '98, after it became clear that there were plans to hand him over to an international tribunal, Pol Pot, according to eyewitnesses, took a fatal dose of Valium and chloroquine. He was found dead in a hammock. Officially, his death was declared a heart attack. His body was burned on a pyre of car tires. Benito Mussolini. In 1943, Mussolini was removed from power by his own government and arrested, but the Germans rescued him and installed him as the puppet leader of a small northern Italian state known as the Republic of Salo. By 1945, however, partisan fighters, Italian resistance groups backed by the Allies, advanced into northern Italy, and the collapse of the Republic of Salo became unavoidable. Mussolini, together with his mistress Clara Petacci, attempted to escape secretly to Switzerland, intending to catch a plane to Spain, where Francisco Franco still ruled. Yet just 2 days later, near Lake Como, they were stopped by communist partisans named Valerio and Bellini and identified by political commissar Urbano Lazzaro. According to the previously signed document, they were supposed to hand Mussolini over to the United Nations, but the next day, he and Petacci were executed by firing squad. The execution took place in the small village of Giulino di Mezzagra and was carried out by a partisan leader whose identity remains uncertain, though many believe it was Walter Audicio. On April 29, 1945, the bodies of Mussolini and Petacci were placed in a van and driven to Milan. There, in Loreto Square, their bodies were thrown to the ground, the crowd insulted and kicked them, and then they were hung upside down from the roof of a gas station, while the crowd threw stones at them. Jong Il. As the successor of the great leader Kim Il-sung, he officially assumed leadership of North Korea in 1994. By that time, the country was already sliding into catastrophe, economically cut off, deprived of Soviet support, and facing the onset of a devastating famine. Even under these grim conditions, his rule was upheld by a carefully crafted cult of personality, filled with propaganda and fantastical legends, from a miraculous birth to claims of his ability to control the weather. However, by the late 2000s, rumors about his deteriorating health began to spread around the world. His unexplained absences aroused suspicion. In 2008, he failed to appear at the military parade dedicated to the 60th anniversary of the DPRK. According to reports from sources such as Japanese intelligence, he suffered a stroke and was left partially paralyzed. South Korean media even suggested that he was replaced by body doubles. Although North Korean media hastily published photos and videos portraying him as healthy, analysts noticed discrepancies. The younger Kim accompanied his father on official trips to China and Russia, despite having no public role. All signs pointed to preparations for a hereditary transfer of power. On December 17, 2011, North Korean media announced the death of Jong Il, a fatal heart attack on a train during an inspection trip. State media reported that after his death, a snowstorm ceased, the sky over Mount Paektu turned red, and the ice on the lake cracked with a loud roar. The country plunged into mourning. Soldiers, students, and elderly people wept uncontrollably. Crowds filled the streets, sobbing relentlessly. However, as with everything in North Korea, it was impossible to tell where the grief was genuine and where it was driven by fear. It was widely understood that those who failed to display enough emotion risked being branded as enemies of the state. After his death, Jong Il was posthumously named Eternal General Secretary and Eternal Chairman of the National Defense Commission. His body was embalmed and placed alongside his father's in a mausoleum. He left behind a nation burdened with a quasi-feudal economy, a nuclear weapons program, and a designated heir, Fidel Castro. In 2006, the health of Fidel Castro, the symbol of the Cuban Revolution, declined. He suffered an intestinal bleeding that required emergency surgery. For the first time in decades, Castro was forced to temporarily transfer power to his younger brother, Raúl Castro. In February 2008, he officially announced his resignation, emphasizing that it would be unfair to hold an office that required more strength and energy than he could give. Raúl Castro took over leadership of the country, but continued to consult his brother on major state matters, maintaining his symbolic presence in the life of the nation. Over the years, Fidel's health continued to deteriorate. The authorities did not disclose details, but rumors about diverticulitis and other complications circulated in the media and among Cubans. Despite this, he appeared in public from time to time, which became an event for his supporters. On November 25, 2016, Fidel Castro passed away in Havana at the age of 90. The official cause of death was not announced. During his years in power, there were more than 600 assassination attempts on Castro's life, ranging from CIA conspiracies to exotic attempts involving poisons and explosives. Park Chung-hee. By the late 1970s, South Korean President Park Chung-hee was rapidly losing public support. While the early years of his rule were associated with rapid economic growth, his increasingly harsh and authoritarian course, especially after the adoption of the so-called Yuxing Constitution, caused widespread discontent. This document effectively entrenched a regime of personal dictatorship, significantly strengthening the president's power. South Korean society was outraged by the strict restrictions on freedom of speech, the omnipotent and fearsome Korean CIA, as well as arbitrary arrests without trial. In 1979, the protest movement reached its peak. In Busan and Masan, thousands of students and workers took to the streets, clashing fiercely with the police. In several regions, the authorities were forced to impose martial law. Just a few days later, on October 26, 1979, during a dinner at one of the government residences in Seoul, the director of the Korean CIA, Kim Jae-gyu, suddenly pulled out a pistol and shot Park dead. At the same time, intelligence agents eliminated the president's security in other parts of the building. Later, Kim claimed that he had acted out of patriotic motives. According to him, Park Chung-hee had become the main obstacle to the democratization of the country. Kim himself was soon arrested, tortured, sentenced to death, and executed in May 1980. Park's death left the country in a state of political vacuum. Formally, the presidency passed to Choi Kyu-ha, but real power fell into the hands of General Chun Doo-hwan, who quickly brought the army and intelligence services under his control. By 1980, he had firmly consolidated his grip on the state, effectively carrying out a new military coup. Adolf Hitler. By early 1945, Germany lay in ruins. The Red Army was advancing from the east, the Allies from the west. Despite the obvious defeat, Hitler refused to surrender and clung to increasingly delusional hopes, a counter-offensive in the Ardennes, or a sudden union of the United States and Britain against the Soviet Union after Roosevelt's death in April. None of this worked. On April 20th, on his 56th birthday, Hitler appeared in public for the last time. In the Reich Chancellery Garden, he decorated teenagers from the Hitler Youth. Soon after, on April 23rd, he descended into the Berlin bunker, which was now fully surrounded by Soviet forces. Hitler spent his final days in the Führer bunker, surrounded by betrayals. Some commanders ignored his orders, others fled, while Himmler and Göring tried to negotiate surrender behind his back. Feeling betrayed, Hitler stripped them of power and declared Himmler a traitor. On the night of April 28, he married his longtime companion Eva Braun. The ceremony was held in the bunker. The next day, the Führer learned of Mussolini's capture and execution by Italian partisans. Determined to avoid the same fate, he made his final decision. On April 30th, as Soviet troops reached the city center, Hitler shot himself, while Eva Braun swallowed a cyanide capsule. By his order, their bodies were burned in the Reich Chancellery Garden, under artillery fire. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels briefly assumed control of what remained of power, but on May 1st he also took his own life. On May 2nd, Berlin surrendered. Later, fragments of Hitler's teeth became the only physical proof of the dictator's death. An official death certificate was issued by a German court, only in 1956.